All right, folks, welcome back. We just finished up the European theater in World War II, the fight against Nazi Germany and Italy. So now we have to talk about the fighting that was going on at mostly the same time in the West, in the Pacific Ocean, against Japan. So we're going to talk about World War II in the Pacific Theater. This is 1941 to 1945. 1941, of course, being Pearl Harbor. So we're going to talk about this time period, this place, what happened, how it happened, and why it's still important today. Sorry, I'm trying to get the thing off. Okay. So Japan invades China. This happens in 1937. We talked about this a little bit before the break. The rape of Nanking, a lot of war crimes being committed here in China. It doesn't really get quite the same attention as stuff like the Holocaust in sort of a Western history class, but and I don't know that it was as bad as the Holocaust, but it was pretty bad. Now, America wasn't going to get involved yet, right? We're still trying to stay neutral. We're still trying to stay out of things. But there are quite a few Americans who feel very strongly that we should be defending our friend China from this aggressive action by their neighbor Japan. And a group of pilots, basically, they head on over to China and they become the Flying Tigers. These are the first American volunteer group. So the U.S. has not officially entered the war, but we have some pilots defending China from the Japanese Air Force. So they were to defend China from the Japanese Air Force, and when they could, try and bomb Japan. So they're fighting before we're technically there. So did Japan start it with Pearl Harbor? Yes. Were there Americans fighting Japan before that? Yes, not officially as part of the military, but there were Americans there in planes fighting the Japanese Air Force. Now, we talked about this a bit last semester. We'll talk more about it in class, sort of to get it back in our heads, because this is a hugely important turning point in U.S. history. December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. We've seen the video. We'll probably watch it again. It's a good video. Japan launches a sneak attack on the Pearl Harbor Naval Base in Hawaii. We'll take a look at sort of the blow-by-blow in class. Some military commanders in Japan thought that a sneak attack that sort of knocked out the U.S. Navy in the Pacific would allow America to sort of surrender the war before we were officially a part of it, and it would let us stay out and let us kind of stay neutral. It looked like we wanted to be. Others in the Japanese military did not think that would work. The Japanese Admiral Yamamoto supposedly said, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." We'll be talking more about the Japanese Admiral Yamamoto in class. So the U.S. declares war, and this is the video. We'll watch it in class. We've watched it before break, and you're welcome to pop open these notes and watch it for yourself as well. But this is officially, by the way, there's a little bit of trivia for you, it's officially the last time the U.S. has ever declared war. Every war that we've fought in since then, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, Afghanistan, Iraq, Cambodia back in the Vietnam War. Technically, all of those have been police actions. They have been, Congress will pass a law authorizing the president to use some force somewhere, but they haven't declared war since World War II. So, the first attack was on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. We had expected, if the Japanese were going to attack, they would have attacked the Philippines first, because the Philippines are a lot closer on a map I know we kind of looked at this last semester, but here's Japan. It's purple island guy here. Here's Hawaii. Like that's a bit of a trip, right? Like that's a bit of a trip. Versus Japan to the Philippines, not that much of a trip. Or even Japan to the Aleutian Islands up here, connected to Alaska. So they definitely took us by surprise when they attacked Pearl Harbor, but they did not take us by surprise when they then attacked the Philippines. We don't have enough of a military force there to hold them off, so we defend the island the islands as best we can until they have to force a retreat. And General MacArthur, shown in the picture there, getting his pants wet, it's very famously, as he leaves, he tells the people of the Philippines, "I shall return." And the good news for him is that he does. Eventually he will get to lead the American naval force to retake the Philippines. Now, what's not great news is what becomes known as the Bataan Death March. Now, this is April of 1942. There are a bunch of American and Filipino soldiers who end up surrendering to the Japanese to sort of cover that retreat. And they end up getting forced marched from the place in the Philippines to the Bataan Peninsula. And that ends up being a 65-mile hike over harsh terrain in harsh conditions. They weren't allowed food or water or rest. And they were put in these prison camps that didn't have much in the way of amenities. And thousands of Filipino soldiers and American soldiers die, both on the march itself and because of the conditions in those camps. So that's another one of those things that comes up a lot in World War II studies. So what we're going to end on today is the Battle of Midway. Now, Midway is a small, usually uninhabited island way out here at the end of the Hawaiian island chain. It's kind of called Midway Island because it's sort of midway in between Japan and Midway in California. It's a similar distance, not exactly the same, but it's kind of the midway point between the U.S. and Japan. And the Battle of Midway takes place from June the 4th to June the 7th, 1942. This is a hugely important turning point in the war. So before June 4th to 7th, 1942, generally Japan was winning. They were conquering islands. They conquered the Philippines. They conquered a lot of our other little island territories out in that way. They were heading toward Hawaii to try and conquer Hawaii. That's, Midway, right? That's part of the Hawaiian island chain. And the U.S. is able to draw the Japanese Navy into a battle here. There's a bunch of we'll talk about it in class in more detail because we're just trying to we don't have time for everything. Like you could probably take a whole history course on just the Battle of Midway and the lead up to it and the consequences of it. It'd be a cool class, but we got to get from 1877 to 2021 now by the end of the year, so we don't have time. But during class, we'll have a little bit more time to talk about the battle itself. But what you need to know is that it was a massively important battle because before the Battle of Midway, Japan is pushing into the Pacific Ocean and pushing closer and closer to the U.S. And after the Battle of Midway, the tide of war starts turning. It's a turning point in the war. And it's a naval battle. I mean, there's planes involved as well. Literally hundreds of planes involved in this battle. But the U.S. is able to win this battle by a lot. They destroy 4 aircraft carriers. Now you might think, well, it's 4 boats. Now, if you know the military, you know that's a big deal. If you're not a big military person, to put it in context, in January 2021, there are 15 aircraft carriers on Earth. The U.S. owns 11 of them. I think 11 of them. And so, there were more aircraft carriers during World War II, but not, a ton more. So losing 4 of them in a single battle was a huge loss. And a big part of this, to kind of go back to last week when we were talking about the Navajo code talkers and the Enigma machine and stuff, the U.S. had cracked the Japanese code. That was part of the lead up to the battle. That was part of sort of being able to draw them into a place where the U.S. wanted to fight the battle. They were able to decode Japanese messages. They knew where the Japanese fleets were. They knew what they were talking about. And they could put out, information that would cause the Japanese to react in a way they wanted them to react, and they could track that reaction. Being able to understand the enemy's code is a huge deal in really any point in warfare, but definitely now in warfare. So tomorrow, we're going to start up on island hopping. We're going to get to some of the other battles that happen, and we will talk about the decision President Truman has to make regarding nuclear weapons. So, see you then. Let's see. Cleaned up the outside, cleaned up the kitchen. Why not go dust some of the furniture? I bet that hasn't been done in a while. Just get that done, knocked out. And again, just do all this without asking and just get it done. Take a couple of minutes. It doesn't take all that long. So, grab some cloth, grab some of that Pledge or some other good dusting stuff, and pick a room, dust it. So, have a good one. Take care. See you tomorrow.